Oh, guys, good, you're here. I am so excited. Guess what? I hope this isn't about your podcast again. Why, did you finally listen to it?
Da-da-da-da, 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 the Groomer Next Door production.
The 1970s and 80s had Elbow, Gravy Train, Purina, Meow Mix, and Bell Bottoms. You've changed your clothes, now change how you feed your pet. Like Bell Bottoms, kick the kibble and join us in the 21st century with the healthiest diet for dogs and cats. Feed naturally, feed raw, feed fishing foods.
Groomer Next Door Podcast.
Dun, 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 dun.
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled and informative episode of the Groomer Next Door. I'm your host, Chris Green, and joining us this week is the delightful Dr. Liz Bales. She has an amazing product called the Noble, and her company, Doc and Phoebe's cat company, is just amazing. So we will dive into all of that and more in just a moment. But before that, let's go into the fact of the week. Because we're having a conversation this week about cats, I thought we would tailor the fact of the week around just that. The most traveled cat is Hamlet, who escaped from his carrier while on a flight. He hid for 7 weeks behind a panel on the airplane. By the time he was discovered, he had traveled nearly 373,000 miles, or for all of you who actually base everything in kilometers, that would be 600,000 kilometers. And I hope you got some frequent flyer miles for that one. Well, before we actually get into this week's episode, let's play an audio from Dr. Bales' Kickstarter, which was a couple years ago, so it's a little outdated, but it explains in perfect description about what her Noble is, and then she will come in and we will start talking about, well, cats. So Claire, play that clip, please.
Welcome to the revolution in the way we feed our cats. Inspired by nature, based in science, loved by cats. The No-Bowl feeding system. I'm veterinarian Dr. Liz Bales. Did you know that how your cats eat is just as important as what your cats eat? That's why I invented an enlightened and natural way to feed your cats that keeps them both happy and healthy. I call it the No-Bowl feeding system. With the No-Bowl feeding system, you get 5 No-Bowls, a trainer, and a portion filler. Once trained, use the dry food you're feeding now, portioned into each of the 5 No-Bowls, and hide them. Your hungry cat will find each one, eat the entire portion, then rest until hunger stimulates your cat to go hunting again. And don't forget to pick up that old bowl, because you won't be needing it anymore. Is your cat lazy, obese, waking you up at night, scarfing and barfing, destroying your furniture, or killing wildlife? These problems can start because you feed them from a bowl. When you lose the bowl and let your cats hunt, you decrease anxiety, improve portion control, eliminate scarf and barf, increase exercise, and your cat returns to a healthy weight. Your cat stays active and entertained while you're at work and is happy hunting while you're sleeping. We designed our product using cutting-edge techniques, putting a premium on safety and ensuring that your cat will be happy and healthy. Then we ran an extensive trial with a devoted group of households, including multi-cat, single cat, with cats young and old. The No-Bowl feeding system is ready.
All right, this week on the podcast, we are so lucky to be joined by Dr. Liz Bales. She has a great company called Doc and Phoebe's Cat Company, and it is a No-Bowl system, and it is so cool, and I have a million things to talk to you about, so let's just dive in, and thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is spectacular.
It is, you know what, it's so much fun to be able to talk to other doctors and just kind of pick your brain. Obviously, we've been doing this for a little bit longer. We should have probably done it while recording, but so much fun.
We've had a fun talk. We should have let everybody in on it.
I know. This happens all the time. Just so you know, it happens all the time, and I love being educated, obviously, and I love just trying to grow as a person. And so being able to listen to you and go back and forth, it's been a blast.
I've had a great time too. This is great.
So tell us your origin story, because you know what? You didn't just wake up one day and they said, here's DVM and enjoy. What made you become a vet? What was the whole thing, the basis behind it? Because as a parent of a 9-year-old daughter, I'm always trying to inspire my daughter to grow up to be a scientist as well. So what made you who you are?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm sort of one of those people that always knew I was going to be a veterinarian from the time I was a little kid. I did everything that I could to be around animals. I did not come from a family who enjoyed animals, so I had to be creative about it. And when I was a little kid without much resources, it was, whatever I could find in the backyard and bugs and that kind of thing. And then I convinced my mom, it's still in my memory, I think I did this by myself, but I am assured that she was with me. I became the neighborhood dog walker by like 4 or 5 years old. I think it was her way of not having to have a dog. She'd let me walk around the neighborhood and walk the dogs that wouldn't yank me over, I suppose. And then by the time I was 5, I started riding horses at a local stable, and there were dogs and cats and horses, and that was just great. And by that time, I had worn my parents down to get a family dog. And, I just did everything I could my whole life to spend time around animals. And what was always most interesting to me was their behavior and their internal world. So, a horse experienced the world very differently than a dog, which is different than a cat, and I found it all just incredibly fascinating. Really, horses were a giant part of my life, and they're the reason I went to vet school. So I started vet school in 2000, and it was in vet school where I was first exposed to the veterinary science of behavior, and that was just it for me. Actually, internal medicine and behavior, because they really go hand in hand so often. A behavioral change can be a sign of a medical problem, and a medical problem can be a sign of a behavioral need. And when it's just that integration was so interesting to me. I found my way ultimately to becoming from going to a horse. I started as a horse vet, and then a dog and cat vet, and finally I found my way to a feline-only hospital. And much to my surprise, it is my very favorite veterinary experience is feline-only. And seeing the world from a cat's perspective is just incredibly fascinating to me.
It really is. I mean, they are so delicate. They are so opinionated. They need so much and yet need so little, which is kind of, I know how ironic that sounds, but they don't need us, but they need us to do everything for them. And if we don't, stress.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting because they're just incredibly different than people. And that mismatch causes a lot of problems because we don't understand them, and we, even well-intentioned, we make a lot of mistakes. People are pack animals, and so are dogs.
Hello.
The way we live and
Hold
the way
on
we
a sec.
see the world.
Dad, we have a guest on the podcast.
Interaction and exercise, all those things are very similar because we're both, coming from that pack perspective. Whereas cats are what we call solitary survivors. They can live in social groups. Those groups are usually mothers and kittens with the occasional adult male, and most of the adult males live on their own. But they live in those social groups, but they hunt alone, and they eat alone, and they don't count on each other for survival. So it's very different. For you and I, if, we were sitting together having a cup of coffee and all of a sudden I get a bad headache and I winced, you would say to me, well, what's wrong? Can I help you? And you'd probably get me some help or some Advil or whatever. The same was true with a dog and a person. The dog has a need. They're usually very overt with it. They whine, they cry, because in their world, they help each other. Mm-hmm. Whereas a cat, really, it is not to a cat's advantage to show a need. When you're a solitary survivor, you better figure it out for yourself. And when you show a need, it makes you very vulnerable as prey. Of course, not to other cats, but just they're not going to protect you. They're not going to help you. It's just not the way it works. And that really changes the way that a cat interacts with the world, and it makes them different from us. So I think that really is the source of a lot of confusion in how we interpret feline behavior.
That's the best way to put it. I mean, silent sufferers is the only other option of terminology. You put it into such a large perspective, because they can't show any weakness. And it's so funny because you're like, it's okay. You know, you've never lived out in the wild, but they just can't do it. It's just an emotion that they can't show.
Yeah, and they just genetically are programmed to behave differently and interact with the world differently. It's not that they don't love us. It's not that they don't feel that, we have the best intentions or are trying our very best to create a great life for them. They just see the world differently. So to really care for a cat, we have to understand their innate needs and then build an environment that respects their natural needs. And that's really has become the focus of my career. I found in practice that so many of the reasons that I would see cats weren't really medical problems. Of course, I did see medical problems and, all the things that we think of like cancer and kidney disease and, everything from A to Z. I've been a vet for 17 years. But most of if they weren't coming for a vaccine, and even if they were, the things that the pet parent wanted to talk about weren't medical. It was, my cat wakes me up in the middle of the night, or my cat's peeing outside the litter box. And we could do a whole workup for that urinary problem, and all the scientific parameters would be normal. But that behavior would persist. My cat eats a bunch of food and throws up, so we do the whole workup for vomiting, and everything could be normal. A lot of these problems seemed to me to have a different root cause, and so that became a passion of mine. What's the mystery here? Where does this mystery lie? That in all these common problems that end up becoming sort of quasi medical problems, and then sometimes true medical problems that don't have a medical origin. And I found that the origin was in an environment that to a human is wonderful and perfectly normal, which is our house. But to a cat is not set up to meet their needs. And when that happens, the buzzword is stress. Cats interpret that as stressful. And I think a lot gets lost in translation there. People think of stress as like, I can't pay my bills, or my, significant other's mad at me, or, how we perceive stress. They think, what's my cat got to be stressed about? They just get to lay around all day. But in fact, when you're a cat, just laying around all day with no resources to be able to enact your innate needs and carry out what it is that makes you a cat is actually a source of stress. I mean, you could imagine. Are you in LA? Is that what you told me?
Well, I'm actually in the Midwest now, but I grew up.
Oh, how fun!
Yeah, sure.
So Midwest. I presume you have some snow every now and then.
Yeah, unfortunately, nice.
And I know that you're rugged living out there, but can you imagine, for instance, if you get snowed in for a day or two, and you might start to get cabin fever? There's not much to do, and you can't. And imagine you have cabin fever now, and your electric goes out, and your cell phone battery is dead, and there's nothing for you to do. That's kind of an indoor cat's life every day.
Yeah.
And that is stressful. In nature. Go ahead.
You stressed me out just thinking about no electricity. I mean, I was very comfortable about the idea of a snow day, but I'm like Netflix and rest.
Nope.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay, now I'm stressed.
Nothing. Right? So in nature, a cat spends almost 80% of the time it's awake, it's hunting. So there's a lot of sleep. They can sleep 16 or more hours a day. But if they're awake, 80% of the time they're hunting. Other than that, they're grooming and eating, and there's some social interaction. But 80% of that is hunting. And when we bring them inside, We have talked a lot about what to feed cats, and that's a very vigorous and controversial topic. But what we forgot is how to feed our cats. We took away, the bulk of their conscious life is hunting, and we took it away, and it has consequences.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. I mean, every so often a mouse will come in from the creek, and that's like the happiest day on their world because they get to go hunt. But on the other side, I look at my cats, and we have this very tall cat tree, and they're usually perched up looking out the window. And what are they looking at? The birds. And what are they thinking? I like to hunt you. So I totally get that.
Yeah. So there's we can talk a lot about it. The subject and the kind of the buzzwords in behavioral medicine are environmental enrichment. Mm-hmm. And that just means how do we take our homes and put back in it the things that a cat needs to feel happy and safe and to be able to enact their normal behaviors.
And that's how you came up with your idea. Now, I did a little bit of research, and I noticed on Kickstarter how you started that, and I was blown away. When I saw the actual end result, I was like, whoa. Here you started it, and you needed $36,000, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. You raised that and $100,000 more. That shows huge demand.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible. So I learned in 2014, I was really aggressively studying the nexus between feline behavior and medicine. And so all those topics that we talked about came back to how they're fed, how cats are fed. And did you know that a cat's stomach is the size of a ping-pong ball? Mm-hmm. They're supposed to eat that amount of food many times a day, and night, actually, not eat a meal from a bowl. And it's not just a small meal, but they actually need to act out the hunt, catch, and play with that small meal before they eat for their neurochemistry to be satisfied. And when we don't give them that ability, they redirect that need into so many of the behaviors we don't like. So they become food obsessed and can be obese. It's a great paper. I know you like to do your research. You should look up Pandora's syndrome, where 70% of urinary disease, it's not from diet, it's not from infection. 70% of urinary disease comes from a lack of an enriched environment, which causes the cat to be stressed. And certain cats have a sort of a glitch in their makeup when those stress hormones get released. We can talk about all the science if you want to, but it causes them to have urinary disease.
Interesting.
And that's work has been done by Dr. Tony Buffington, and it's a very interesting work. So many of these problems actually come from stress. Gobbling up your food and throwing it up. Mm-hmm. The urinary disease that we talked about. And then I was at a conference learning about all this stuff, and the veterinary lecturer, at the end of this 3-day series, asked a group, it was about 150 cat vets in the room, and she said, do you know the number one cause of death for cats? I'll ask you, what would you imagine it is?
I would have actually said kidney failure.
And I raised my hand, and that's what I said. I thought so, too. And she said, nope. The number one cause of death for cats is euthanasia. Oh. And the number one cause of euthanasia are behavior problems that cause cats to be returned to the shelter. Oh. Where there's no home for them. 70% of, I think the number is about 70% of cats that get taken in at a shelter never leave. Wow. I thought, whoa. So we know the number one cause of death for the animal that we've devoted our life to. We know why it's happening. We know that we can actually someone's got to find a way to fulfill this need. And where in my office I can treat 1 or 2 or 3 cats at a time, that are in a life and death situation. What if someone generated a way that cats could hunt, catch, and play with their food and meet this need, and the behavior problems either went away or diminished, and they didn't get returned to the shelter? We could save millions of cats.
Which is the greatest segue to an origin story on how you came up with this project, by the way.
So that's when it started.
I love it.
That's when it started.
So, okay, you get the 136,000. So obviously you're in production now. Then what becomes the next big problem or next big issue that you have to actually tackle?
That's such a good question. You know, this has been a multifaceted journey because now I sort of unexpectedly and not necessarily voluntarily, I've become a business person. I really just want to help cats, but if I want to help cats, the company has to survive. And so the challenges aren't what I expected. What's happened in the past 4 years since I, came up with the idea. Veterinarians have been talking about this for 20 years, and now there's a solution. So the growth of the concept, the research on the concept, the buy-in on the concept that this is actually best has been mind-bogglingly good. I just had never dreamed that my idea would start to have a life of its own in helping cats. That's just been amazing. And I never dreamed that the press would care so much. I'm on this phone talking to you. I've been interviewed by the New York Times and the Daily Mail, and, wow. But what I didn't expect, and my biggest challenge, is getting the average cat parent to understand. Right. I thought it would be easy. Look, cats need to hunt. Now they can hunt. Don't you want your cat to be happy? Don't you want your cat to be healthy? I kind of thought that would be the easy part, and that has been the hard part.
I believe that. Just by doing this podcast alone, I believe that would be the most difficult part of it all. I don't know why.
And I know people love their cats. I mean, I'm not questioning that. I just didn't expect that piece to be the hard part.
Yeah, it's always about the education part. It's always about trying to get people to understand it, to almost in a sense process it and then ingest it. That's the part that's the challenge. You think, oh, this is very simple, A, B, C, and yet it doesn't always register that way with people. And yet you can, and I get it from your perspective. You're very science driven, so you can see it from the full spectrum. It doesn't always seem to apply when it comes to everyday people or pet parents. It's bizarre. Yeah. It is.
So I'm going to turn the tables. I know you've done your homework. I think it is that simple. How would you explain it to someone?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Usually I'm never asked questions. Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is, what is your cat's normal day-to-day life? And the answer is going to almost always be, they're going to sleep, eat, and poop. And it's like, okay, well, how do you bring them back to their origin? How do you actually get them so they're not going to be obese? How are you going to exercise them? Because number one, our biggest problem that cats and dogs are plagued with right now is they're not exercised. And what is one of the biggest problems that you see as a vet? Obese dogs, obese cats. And why is that? Because they're not being exercised. As humans, we're being told all the time, it's what we eat and it's exercise. Those are our two common things that we need to have a healthy life. Why does that stop with us? Why are we actually doing this with our dogs? Why aren't we doing this with our cats? And that's how I would pretty much perceive it and almost kind of sell it.
I love it. You're hired. You're my new spokesperson.
Okay, I can do that.
And I actually think, for me, it goes one more step in that you can imagine as a human being in your day-to-day what your strong innate needs are. And this is probably not a scientific need of mine. Maybe it's more of a want, but in the morning, I really want coffee.
Yep.
And if I don't get my coffee, it changes my whole day. And I might be a little more short-tempered with my kids. You know, when we don't have our needs met, we can redirect that need into negative behavior. And I think that's happening a lot with cats. Their hunting need isn't being met, and that need gets redirected into stuff that we don't really like.
Agreed. Now, let's get into the actual concept here. How does the Noble work?
So it's super simple, and there's a training period, because we've conditioned our cats now to expect food from a bowl. So for some cats, learning how to go bowl free is about 2 minutes, and for some cats it can actually be days. So that's the rare cat. I would say 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 get it very quickly. But the pace at which they learn has no bearing on the success that they're going to have once they get it. It's kind of like learning to ride a bike. So we'll say that. So in your kit, you're going to get a trainer, which kind of looks like a giant Easter egg with a bunch of holes in it. So the cat can see the food and smell the food. And really the missing link is I need to move this thing around to get my food. Once they've got that concept, there's 5 mouse-shaped feeders. You measure your food, and in this case, I'm going to talk about it for dry food. So you measure your dry food, you split it between the 5 mice, and you hide them in different parts of the house. And in the beginning, you're going to start it really easy. Let's say you've always fed in the kitchen. Well, now you just put them around the kitchen, behind a table leg, and so your cat learns that these aren't going to be where the bowl was anymore. Once they're comfortable with that, you can put it, up on a chair and start moving it up and down and around in the environment. And once they start to get it, pretty quickly, you actually can hide them. Don't underestimate your cat. I can hide one in a shoebox, put the lid on the shoebox, and hide the shoebox under the bed or up on a cabinet. In fact, on Twitter right now, there's a picture of a cat opening up a box and getting a feeder out of it. And so you move those around, and now your cat gets to spend its day hunting, catching, and playing with these small meals before eating them. So lots of people don't feed just dry. You'll feed wet or you feed raw. In those instances, I don't have a feeder that is sanitary to hide around your house for those foods. So I'm still recommending that you feed those foods how you do in the kitchen, and then find a suitable dry or freeze-dried treat. There's lots of great freeze-dried chicken and salmon and tuna. And pick your favorite. And it's not about the volume of food that's in the feeder. It's about your cat getting the chance to replicate their normal predatory behavior. So even if you're feeding something other than kibble, you can still provide that experience for your cat.
I like it. I like it a lot. It's to the point, and it actually works, and it gets your cat active. I noticed that benefits of hunting was to prevent bad behavior, sleep the entire night, which I don't think the problem in my house. Now we have a lot of rescues as well, so we have our number of cats. But I'll tell you, the one time that I really see them the most active is when we first get up. They are so happy that we're awake. Ooh, the human's up. The human's up. That's the worst time ever. So sleep the entire night. I mean, I get it. They're nocturnal, so they're going to be bouncing.
Actually, the science says that they are crepuscular. So they hunt 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. It's not just day and it's not just night. They hunt when the opportunity's there. But for a cat, most of their prey is active at dawn and dusk. So, between 4 and 6 in the morning is when Mother Nature says, it would be really fun to go hunt and get a meal right now.
I can see where that would work.
And that doesn't go away whether there's a bowl or not. I mean, that need to be up and hunt is there. And so if there's not a way for them to hunt, they're going to come hunt you.
Right.
So if you put some either food or treats in the feeders and hide them overnight, they will hunt because that's what Mother Nature's telling them to do, and you get to sleep, which is Mother Nature wants you to do.
Right, or you're going to need more coffee in the morning.
Exactly.
Now, I had one question on litter box solutions on the benefits of hunting. So how does that become a benefit? How is that going to make any kind of difference?
That's an awesome question. It's an awesome question, and it goes back to that Pandora's syndrome paper that we talked about. So, again, cats can have an inappropriate response to stress, which causes urinary pain and even blood in the urine. The inappropriate response is that there becomes a thinning of the lining of the bladder, and the urine becomes in contact with the bladder, and it makes it painful. And that happens as a result of the way they perceive their environment that is stressful. So if you provide enrichment and an ability for them to carry out their natural instincts, that stress goes away.
Gotcha.
In fact, just this month, we found I got a Google alert. Now, I didn't know what that was 2 years ago, but I know what it is now. That there was some press out about our company. And so I looked it up, and BuzzFeed named the indoor hunting feeder the #1 game changer that every pet parent needs to know about.
Wow.
That's like, whoa.
Congratulations.
That's pretty awesome, right? And I went and read why. And the author of the piece has a cat that has urinary disease. And she'd been to her vet, and she had done everything the vet said to do. She's a very devoted owner. And the urinary symptoms persisted. And the vet said, you got to get this hunting feeder thing and get your cat to hunt for its food. And I guess she did as instructed, and once the cat learned how to do it, there has not been any more pee outside the litter box.
That is a big deal. Yeah, because usually I always have heard the same thing. When a cat is, going anywhere or even driblets here and there, it's a UTI. So, of course.
And I would love to just talk about this for a second. When you say UTI, do you know what those initials stand for?
Urinary tract infection?
Correct. What's the infection part?
The urinary tract?
So when we say infection, what we mean is there's bacteria in the urine.
Okay.
And what I want people to understand is if your cat it's always good to let a vet check them out and make sure that there's no medical problem. Because when your cat's peeing outside the litter box, there's so many things it could be. But do you know that pretty much the least likely thing it could be is a urinary tract infection? If a cat is more than 1 and less than 10 years old, the odds of them having a bacterial urinary tract infection that requires antibiotics is less than 3%. I would just love everyone to know that. That is in the data. So they could have a stone, they could have crystals, but it's more than a 70% chance that it's from a lack of environmental enrichment, as per this environmental enrichment study, the Pandora's syndrome paper. I wish everyone would take a look for it. So when the concept of urinary tract infection is much more common in human beings and actually much more common in dogs, but cats are the #1 species to display urinary symptoms. But we need to really open our mind and get out of this infection loop that we're in. It's just not so. It's not impossible. It's not impossible that it's a bacterial infection, so we should certainly keep that in mind and test for it if we feel like that's likely. But if you were going to buy a lottery ticket and I told you your odds were 70% of winning, would you buy it?
Well, I'd buy it even if it was 2%, just because I'd be hopeful I'd do the 2%.
But would you rather buy the lottery ticket that's a 70%,
yes,
or would you rather buy the lottery ticket that's a less than 3%?
I like the 70%. I like those odds better, but.
So again, it's always best to, if you have a cat that has a medical issue, get it checked out. But and this is my whole, reason for being, is that once we know that the medical things are sorted out, we've got to look to the emotional life of the cat.
I totally get that completely. Now, I know you have a hard cap, so I will let you go. But please do me a favor, come back, because I've got so much I want to, go over. And again, we should have started sooner because I've had a blast. Is there anything that we should put out there before we actually, say goodbye to this episode?
Well, if you'd love more information, take a look at the website, which is docandphoebe.com. And I have a blog, which mysteriously is very hard to find on the website itself. But if you go on my Facebook page, I just put a post up recently about if you don't want your cat on your kitchen counter, how you can deal with that from the cat's perspective and get a better cure than the other solutions out there. So I post on there frequently, and it's the Catadvocate, the advocate for cats on Facebook. So take a look there and feel free to reach out with any questions.
Do you get a chance to talk about you being the cat? Well, I can't even go with it. It's just such a cat.
The Catadvocate.
There it is, Catadvocate. It was just not coming out. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bales, for being on. I really appreciate it. And again, it's been an absolute pleasure having this time to speak with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been so fun.
It has been a blast. Well, that's this week's episode, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, gotta go in my bedtime.